Welcome to StartupHakk. Today we'll be continuing our series on coding for entrepreneurs. I'm a startup founder and a developer, and I know the perfect balance between the two. So I'm doing a series of coding tutorials that include easy projects for startups to be able to make it easier for you to start your business, build the things that you need, or just learning so you can be more efficient managing developers or contractors. And if that's what you're doing, great. No matter what the reason that you're learning to code, I know it will only make your business easier and better, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to StartupHakk. My name is Spencer Thomason. I am the CEO and co-founder of CleanRouter, as well as many other products. Here are some lessons that I've learned building a successful business while challenging startup norms. My challenge is to push you to rethink startup success. Welcome to StartupHakk. All right, let's dig in and go ahead and get started. This is the second in a series of tutorials showing how to use Entity Framework Core in ASP.NET Core Razor pages. The tutorials are to build a website for a fictional university. The site includes functionality such as student admission, course creation, and instructor assignment. The tutorial uses the code-first approach. It ultimately depends on the technology you're building with, but in this series we're working with .NET and .NET Core. For that, you want to use Microsoft Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. I'm using Visual Studio. But today we're going to work on part 2 of this series. So if you haven't, make sure you go and check out the one from last time, and make sure you like and subscribe to the page because we bring you a lot of good stuff. And so make sure that you like and subscribe to the page. Today what we're going to be working on is adding basic Crud functionality to our project. Now when I say Crud, I'm talking about create, update, and delete. So those are your general Crud operations. So let's go ahead and dive into the Visual Studio today and get started. Okay, so as with always, you always want to make sure that you go into your Get changes here and pull the latest, and make sure you get all the latest code so you have the latest samples from us. Now, we were working on part 1 yesterday. Today we're going to work on part 2. So you right click here and say set a startup project so that we can run our code and debug. Now, today we're going to work on starting to make some of these changes. So one of the first things we want to do is go to our pages and then students and our details page here. Oops, not delete, details page. And then in the details page, we're going to hit F7. And that brings us into the code behind. And so if you expand this on the left here, you can see the code behind page. So this is going to bring us to the code behind page. And the most important part that we're going to change here is we want to make sure that on the get async that we change this line right here to go and to get the students. So what this does is this is the get for the student. So if you get a student, so it's a student/get, then it will go and return and get all of the courses, all the students that have an ID. Now what we're going to do is change this to use what's called link. And so the link project is what allows us to then do this type of a query, following this type of a query type language. So we're looking for the students that include enrollments and then include courses as no tracking and then first or default. And so we can see that this is using Entity Framework to do some of the queries against these, and this will actually generate a SQL query. So this is a code-first approach, which allows you to make changes to your database using this link type of query language instead of writing out standard SQL. And once we do this, this will go into fetch, get the first or default of the student with a student ID, and look for just those enrolled and in courses. So this then, as we run this, and we can put let's go ahead and put a breakpoint here. So if we run our app now, as we, so this takes just a second to get started up, especially as we start to work with Entity Framework, as it's doing a fair amount on the back end as we're getting things ready. So as you see it going through here, you can see that it's seeding our database, it's getting things started, because in this case, our database is, it's checking to make sure that everything, so we just did some migrations that have happened here in the background. So this is some of the first parts is running some of these migrations. So now it didn't start up a browser page because we were actually on a code behind page. So I'm going to actually stop and then restart this, and that's a good example. If you're in your code behind page, it's not going to automatically, Visual Studio won't automatically start the browser for you. So if you want the browser to start, you really need, it's a lot easier if you just select a HTML page and fire up your debugger again, and this will fire and start after it's done all the checks for the migration. Now we can see that it started up a browser and has it attached to the debugger. So now if I go to students and I go to the details, we can see that it's going to grab that student. So it's checked to see that the student ID is not null and that the student isn't null. And once we get this, then you can see it's checking for the ID, it's checking for our student's course, right? And then looking for the enrollment. So after we F10 through that, we can see that we've come back now with an hydrated object. We can see that there's 3 enrollments, and you can see the EF, Entity Framework has populated this for us. So if I refer to EF, I'm referring to Entity Framework. And so this is an example of a get, or just your standard get operator, or read, right? So for Crud is create, read, update, or delete. So this would be a standard example of a read. And so that's a very helpful, so that's the first one of ours. Now the next piece that we're going to work with is we want to get a list of all of the enrollments. So we're going to let's go back to Visual Studio here. We can kill our debugger. And let's go to the pages, students, and the details again. So we're back into the details page. And now what we're going to do is this is where we're going to replace the code inside of the details page so that we can get the buttons. So those buttons that we saw on there, the ability to hit delete and get and all of those buttons here we're going to add this code here to grab and populate that information. So now we can get the enrollments and add enrollments to the page. So again, once we've added this, and we'll run our debugger again. So the debugger came up now, and we can see that as we go to the students, we are able to see the enrollment date. And so this is what's adding the enrollment date to the page, was these lines of code that we added here. So you can also see that for each one, we're also going to see, in the details page, let's go back to our details page here. So if we go to details, we can see we're going to go do the read, and now we can see that it's linked to the enrollments table, so we can see exactly what Alexander Carson was enrolled in and what his grades was for each of these. So this is how we start to join multiple data sets together. So in this case, we have the enrollments table, and it's including that join on the enrollments table. So this is another good example. And so let's go work on an example for you for update. So now we're going to go to the students and to create. So, and then again, anytime you're on the CS/HTML, you can hit F7, and it'll pop you back to the code behind. So this is the code behind for the create page. So now what we're working on here is we're going to say, hey, if we post to this page, so on post, we're going to post, and it's going to take a student, and it's going to map and we're going to create a new student, being the first name, last name, and the enrollment date. So let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here. And let's go back to our list. And then here, if we want to create a new student, so we're going to say Thomason, Spencer, enrollment date is, let's say we enrolled today, 07/07/2022. We don't even want to put a time. So looks like it's going to require a time. So we can use our date picker here, and let's just go and use today. It looks like it'll grab the current time and create that. Now, we can see that we've posted to here, and so first what we do is create an empty student. And so if we hover over this, we can see what an empty student looks like, with everything is all nulls. Let's go back to that. So we can see that everything's null on it. Now, as we step through this, we can see that student has had this entry. And based on this entry, you can see that we now have this entry that we're going to do. We're going to set the value to the entry, and then we save it, and then we return back to page of the index. So this will do the redirect to the page. So after we create this, it's going to return us back to the index page, which will then load, and now we can see my fancy new student down here. So that's now an example of a create, which also works the same way as an update. Now, We can also then move to the next one where we start to look at some of the other view models. And you can go through the example here, and let's go through edit. So now we're going to edit my student here, and let's go look at this edit code before we post it. So we've worked with create, we've worked with the details page. Let's go look at the edit page. So the edit page, you can see, has pretty standard form, right? So you have last name, first name, enrollment date. So we can see those in the HTML. Now in the code behind, we can see an onGet, which will go and find the student. And so that's where it fetches the original information. And then on post, we're going to see that it's going to actually do an update on it. So it'll take the student and get that, and then it will populate it with the first name, last name, and enrollment date, and then it just saves it back. So let's go ahead and put our breakpoint here again. And whoops, let's put our, that's as good as any place. Let's put our breakpoint on here, and let's go ahead and try an update. Because you notice that I forgot to capitalize my name here. Maybe we'll add a middle initial, Monkeys, or my middle name, because my middle name is Monkeys. Then we hit save, and you can see that it's, first name. And so sometimes the IntelliSense won't do it like this, because in this case it actually hasn't, because if you look at this link query, what it's saying is find the student to update. So if you go look to the student to update, right, you see Spencer, so it's pulled that student, and then it's going to pull these values. And so this link query is saying map this dynamic object to first name, last name, enrolled. So now that I've done that, now the student update has changed, and it should have my new. So now it's Spencer Monkeys, and with a capital S, and we're going to tell it to step through and make the save and redirect back to the home page. And there we see our update. So this is an example of an update. Now for delete, we'd see that we want to delete this student, and it's going to prompt us. So this has got a pretty fancy delete page here, and we're going to do, the delete is pretty straightforward. It's basically going to say, hey, here's your student from the context of students, and then, that's actually on the get, because this is where it's loading it to the page, right? So we still have a get even though this is a delete page. And then the post is where it's actually going to delete. So there's some various different verbs and ways you can do this. Some people use put for deletes. Some use delete, the rest verb of delete for deletes. In this case, it's doing a dynamic bind on the property. So this one is actually just doing, the remove student here. And so it's doing that off of a post. So if I hit this button, it'll post, and now Spencer is gone. So we've now done create, update, and delete using Entity Framework. This is a very simple, Entity Framework is one of the easiest ways to do code first and to be able to allow you to do more and more, simpler programming. I'm always a little cautious with Entity Framework. I think it gives you just enough rope to hang yourself. And so I watch some things like this where a developer may do this, and then maybe they're mixing objects or doing things that they don't fully recognize exactly what's going on in the back end. Because at the end of the day, this is actually just generating SQL and running SQL. And so sometimes it can allow you to get yourself into a little bit of trouble. But overall, understanding any framework is something every developer needs to do. You'll always cross paths with a lot of code. If you use ASP.NET Identity, it's going to use Entity Framework under the covers. And so learning Entity Framework, I think, is always a very valuable skill for every developer to have. So it's one that I definitely would encourage everyone to become familiar with and to get up to speed on. Make sure you grab your clean router and clean phone. It's the best way to keep your kids safe online. And we'll talk with you guys next time.